Okay. Hi, check. Am I audible?
Yes, Kak, you are audible.
All right. So for the government team, kejar deadline, are you complete?
Complete.
All right. For I love you so much, but I don't know how to tell you, but I know you don't love me back. Op, are you complete?
Yeah, we are.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So for the judges, Aya.
I'm here.
Okay. Elgat.
Hadir.
Yeah. Indi.
Hi, here.
Stay.
Here.
All right. Okay. So hi everyone. Wait. Okay. Okay. So hi everyone. Welcome to the grand final round of SETARA 2021. My name is Chia. I'll be your chair judge for this grand final round. Before we start the debate, I would like to give the floor to my panel of judges to introduce themselves. Let's start with the alphabetical order. Batara.
Okay, hi, I'm Batara from Binus. Preferred gender pronouns, he, they. Good luck for all the finalists.
Okay, next, Elgar.
Hi everyone. My name is Algard. I'm from UI. Good luck all.
Okay, next, Indi.
Hi, I'm Indy from Pajajaran. Good luck, everyone.
Okay, next, Stay.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. Pronoun she, they. Good luck.
All right, thank you very much for all panel of judges. So in the government team, we have kejar deadline. The first speaker would be Jones, second speaker would be Kalista, the third speaker will be Michelle, and the reply speech will be delivered by Kalista. Next, in the op team, we have I love you so much, but I don't know how to tell you, but I know you didn't love me back. First speaker is Nadine, second Dazzle, third Tati, and then the reply speech will be delivered by Dazzle. So debating under the motion, this house will grant environmentally sensitive areas legal personhood. Without further ado, I'd like to call upon the PM to start the debate. Check your sound, state your POI preference. If you do not state that, the POI is going by default through chat box. PM, you may start.
Can everyone hear me and see me?
Yes.
Right, thank you. My preferred pronoun gender is she or him, and I prefer my POS through chat. Right. 3 points of setup in this debate. 1, we are talking about environmentally sensitive areas, which means that the area is very important for long-term maintenance. For example, like the Nile River, which possesses a significant importance in ecosystems. For creating fertile lands around the river, it directly links to the livelihood of people because it acts as a water resource for millions and has provided a source of irrigation to transform the dry area around it into a large agricultural land. Secondly, legal personhood means that we will give the sensitive areas the right as a person. That is to say, we will give rights as not being heard, and etc. I think mostly the concern and contentious part is on issues of pollution for environmental destruction. Thirdly, for companies for individuals that destruct or pollute the areas, they will receive legal punishment. That is varies based on the degree of severity, just like the current court. So there's going to be a court that will decide on what punishment is justified. So if the opposition says we will punish people for minor crimes and that's bad, that's not true because the punishment will be proportionate to the crime. That being said, 2 arguments. 1, why we change corporations incentive and which are the major processes at school. Secondly, why do we change society? Moving on to my first argument. Why can we change corporations? Which are the most polluting attractions at school to have more regulations and act better? The premise of this argument is that companies are also some of the largest polluters as well, and we acknowledge that we need to pressure them to act more ethically and engage in the environmental friendly efforts. Firstly, why do companies act better? On corporations, I want to know, unlike what opposition might say, that this harms poor individuals. I first frame that corporations like MNCs are the major polluters and destruction of the environment. Therefore, the main interest of the run, considering the punishment we give, is proportionate to the degree of destruction they do. This is because of 2 reasons. 1, corporations have the incentive to pollute and destruct sensitive areas because usually those kinds of areas have more prosperities to build up new businesses. For instance, those areas provide lands which can be used to build up new factories, which is harmful because those businesses are going to be major contributing factors to water pollution across the globe or like those kinds of air portions, because they usually do illegal dumping or contaminate water, gases, and etc. Secondly, most likely, sensitive environments are full of natural resources and rich in terms of crops. They are deeded by the corporations. Therefore, there is an incentive for corporations to come to the sensitive area and gain profit by taking away their natural resources. For example, like corporations that destroy the Amazon forest to take oil and gas and make them as their raw materials. All of that caused by the destruction of this kind of sensitive environment. These kinds of reverse incentive are going to be worse in your position. In a position where companies keep destroying this area because they see it as profitable and there's no consequence or punishment for doing it, because the environment is the environment, there's no legal punishment, they cannot be sued, etc. They don't want to change all of their business practices they have been going on, because for decades and other methods of encouraging to be climate friendlier also do not work, as they can easily just do PR friendly stuff without actually changing what goes into their products, like big campaigns about how much you're donating to the rainforest, but continuing to use the refuse. We think that is just a rhetoric that companies are used like most likely to use. Comparative on our side, it's much more likely that companies now have the incentive to innovate to find climate-friendly options, i.e. finding areas that are less sensitive, or finding more sustainable options like Airbus innovating with liquid nitrogen and oxygen for their flights. Why? Because there's a cost opportunity. That means on our mechanism addresses companies to their core interest, which is their profit incentive. One, legal punishment means fines, which means companies losing a lot of their profits they gain from distorting the environment. Therefore, they will be shifted to the companies and have more incentive to opt for other options that are more green, because they don't want to lose their money and profit. Secondly, I think companies cannot get away with this. The reason is A, law is binding. B, legal punishment sets precedence that sets a standard that is action you commit as a corporation is wrong. Therefore, they can no longer use buzzwords to disguise their heinous actions and to prevent the loss of reputation. I'd say companies are going to choose to be risk adverse and opt for safer options instead. But on to my second argument then, on how do we change society? But before that, I'll take that PY.
When entering into like lawsuits or contracts, who will represent these ESAs?
I believe that it's so easy for those kinds of environment to actually gain those like independent third party, and like in general, like it's already happening inside those kinds of like people in general. Like there's already experts in environment, there's already like caring for the legal persons for the environment in and of itself. Okay, jumping to my second argument then, on how do we change society. I want to know that opposition cannot rely on individuals' progress or neighbors' attempt to campaign. Instead, we need punitive actions, and that's for 6 structural reasons. 1, we think most harm of climate change on the environment are not obvious and visceral. In many cases, it is unclear what the impacts are unless you have been plagued by the environmental damage, which is already too late. Secondly, it is easy for governments to distort narratives. Some individuals don't think that a flood is caused by pollution, when you can frame it and shape it as natural disaster, being once in a millennium, which is what the Chinese government literally did in the worst flood in human history in a long time. Thirdly, because there's a collective action problem, when often individuals think their actions have minimal consequences, so why are they going to be the ones responsible to make a personal sacrifice when other people are not going to do the same thing? They have less incentive to do it because they don't see people around them trying to act and do better for the environment itself, so they have less incentive to do it because they don't want to have their own sacrifice at the end of the day. Fourthly, when there's a prioritization problem, you may care to some extent about the environment, it isn't likely going to be voting determinant. Compared to the economic policies, they're immediate and have direct consequences as to where you live and how you're going to be living in the next 5 years. What you're able to buy and what schools you can go to also affects on the economic policies, which is why people are more likely to actually vote for people who have economic policies that environment that is like very long term but has a very permanent impact. Fifthly, because there's a lack of visibility as to how much an individual is polluting the area, it's unclear to the extent of which harm action creates and etc. Because when you look at companies polluting the area and polluting air, those kinds of smoke and those kinds of gases just disappears. But you don't know where it went to. You don't know how much area and environment that's going to create, how many like nitrogen and like chemicals that have been thrown into the water, because you cannot visibly see it. But once you can, it's already too late for you anyways. Sixthly, there's a lack of incentive for companies to tell consumers as well, because companies prefer consumers to buy more than less, versus on their side, if companies want to be honest and brutal, they are scaring away customers and painting them to be morally evil. That is not optimal on their side, in either side of the house. Placing an environmentally friendly bad logo is not enough to deter influence from the worst action. So how does this change on our side, and what are the mechanisms? We say it's quite simple. And if you do have a direct stake, the punishment directly reshapes your choices to not exceed it. We change the incentive in majority. This is because you humanize the environment as a person. We set a moral code that environment is a person, and there's a punishment if you pollute. This changes them in 2 ways. One, people pollute less in the area because people care more about those kinds of like environment that they're already perceiving. And secondly, people condemn companies that do more violations for the environment itself, when there's a lot of pollutants, when they can see the gases that are coming out from factories, and it's way better advocacy for the people itself. And there's going to be more social movement for these kinds of environmentalists and activism in general for under our side, because now we kind of support them and say to them that yes, nature is important, environment is important for us to perceive and preserve. The conclusion of this argument is that besides creating a better environment for all society that wins this debate, we have a side that aligns on individuals' interests with the greater interest of society. We don't need them to be environmental advocates. We care more about the fact that they are now taking account of their self-interest to solve climate change. I don't think the concern is who is educating. There's a third-party judge. As for this environment, I think it can generally be actually quantified as well under our side. For all those reasons, we believe that the questions under their side is how they can actually help those kinds of environment without those kinds of legal personnel under their house. For all those reasons, we're very proud to propose.
All right, I think the Prime Minister for that speech. To continue, I call upon the leader of OP to start the OP's case. Here.
Can I confirm that I'm audible and visible?
Yes, audible and visible.
All right. Please use she, her pronouns, and I prefer POIs verbally. With that, I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. It is clear that the world is in an environmental crisis, but providing ESA's legal personhood would not only contribute to the crisis, but start another one, ladies and gentlemen. The question of how plants and areas are able to nurture for themselves without the aid of humans. Our model then stands that we will be coming with today is number 1, ESAs will not have legal personhood. Most ESAs are going to be under the control of the government. And this is likely because governments care about preserving environmental entities, for example, the Amazon rainforest, and some of them are likely to be under the control of indigenous groups. And in situations where environmental degradation is bad, this is even more important. And thus, the burden on government is to prove why legal personhood is exclusively beneficial. This kills your case because punishing people is absolutely not exclusive. This debate is not about whether companies can be sued because they already are. However, it's about whether the ESA should be the one to sue them. So firstly, we would like to begin with our rebuttals. You'd say that we are changing corporations, but if corporations' business model is based from environmental exploitation, they will likely continue that on either side. In fact, they will find loopholes, which I will talk about in my second argument. Additionally, general representation does not compare to the million-dollar lawyers hired by MNCs and big corporations. This nullifies your argument about holding big businesses accountable. And secondly, you state that it manipulates people by blaming the environmental issues on natural disasters. But there will really be natural issues if we ignore everything that if we ignore and we neglect issues going on in the environment. You can use China as example, fine, but we use the entire world as an example. We state that climate change affects every single plant and every single leaf on this planet. So by not being able to make change, maybe there's no pollution in this world, fine, but there will be a plethora of other issues that will occur. You also state that it changes the incentives of people on the ground. However, there are environmental campaigns that do not need a legal basis. If your argument is about awareness, that same third-party gift information to society can still exist. Punishment is not exclusive because people will not interact with ESAs in rural areas, right? Most people will not be in the nature reserve, so this is untrue. Now we will be moving on to the first argument, which is why, on principle, ESAs cannot have legal personhood. 1, why legal personhood makes no sense. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to compare this one first with minors who have cognition and are underage. Well, let me ask a question to you. If minors can have cognition, but they do not prioritize the ability to be treated, if they do not have the ability to be treated as a person that can have their own property, then why should we allow environmentally sensitive areas to have so? There is no real benefit, i.e. the value of an ESA only stems from the benefit it provides to humans. We must realize that suing large corporations can already be done by inhabitations on that land or by that particular government itself. It requires a representative, not real, and there is no real personhood to have. It's not real personhood if you have one's rights and one's opinions represented by another party. The second thing that we'd like to state is that legal personhood is naturally restrictive. Legal personhood covers all aspects of an area's rights. The ESA will own the property rights of all the flora and fauna that reside within it, and without legal personhood, an owner can change its features, for example, to conserve a certain species. With this, if there is a species that is endangered within the area, no person will be able to do anything about that. Because why? Because in the status quo, people could change the area to conserve it after entering a written argument with its owner. But since the area has gained legal personhood, it should be able to consent to things. Yes? Well, in this case, the environment cannot speak for itself. And what is the impact of this? Seeing as these areas are unable to make these decisions, no decision will be made, ladies and gentlemen. In other words, there will not be change. Seeing as these areas are owned by those other areas of which we as real humans have no control over. It's true that humans have caused harm in biodiversity in the environment. But it's also true that humans protect the environment as well. For example, Balinese people treat these areas such as gods, preserving the environment and often investing in top-of-the-line technology in order to benefit the places that they live in. The third point we'd like to bring is that legal personhood restricts the effectivity of government policy. E.g., maybe the government needs to open certain plantations to boost economies, but they already created replantation elsewhere. This is naturally bad for the livelihoods of the people. For example, in Indonesia, when people rely on the palm oil industry. Fourthly, legal personhood prevents natives from claiming and taking care of their land. Governments from a certain country, for example, the US, are notorious for taking away land from native inhabitants. Are we really going to take away the natives' land that we have just given back? The natives know how to take care of the land the best way they see fit and even view the environment with reverence, which ensures that they won't destroy the environment. Our second argument will discuss why this legal loophole opens more possibilities for exploitation. The premise is that this allows for corporations and people to be in the general opposition to the environment. And why is this bad for the government? Because corporations that want to build projects near ESAs are likely to make the ESA enter into coercive deals, for example, contracts, and note that they have a myriad of lawyers that are likely to find legal loopholes in its implementation. These contracts are legally binding, which means that you can effectively give a company 10 years of contracts, and corporations can sue into the land. Corporations are big businesses with an almost bottomless amount of money to search for the world's best lawyers. If any suing occurs, there is a countersuit towards the land itself. And when this suit occurs, it is likely that the damages paid are in the form of environmental assets. For example, the land itself or the property on that land. So, no, thank you. Thus, this is bad because you give corporations more control over this land. ESAs will have no defense at all, ladies and gentlemen. That is effectively illegal for a representative to come and defend a client without even knowing what their wishes are, ladies and gentlemen. Thus, we would like to state that it is likely that corporate lawyers are going to strike out witnesses or strike out lawyers on that basis even, rendering ESAs and their rights completely defenseless. So why is our alternative, what is our alternative on the opposition? Well, firstly, there is no legal loophole. Governments are free to enter the environment. And most of these governments do care about environmental protection because it is one, a voting issue in many elections, and two, directly deals with the people, with the welfare of the people on the ground. And governments, and for corporations, if they sue the government lose some money, but it pays that out of its own pockets in response to actually giving up some of the ESA's aspects, for example, certain aspects of the land. And it is for all the reasons that the opposition has stated before that we believe that ESAs should not and will not ever have legal personhood. Thank you.
All right, I thank the leader of OP for that speech. To extend government's case, I call upon DPM, please.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Sure. Starting in 3, 2, and 1. I'd say it's about time we start giving stricter regulations on the destruction of vital environments. I wonder what the opposition team wants us to debate today, because by their concession, they also want to have punishments and for people to not enter these regions, right? So if they say that they're not going to want people to destroy the environment and they realize the importance of these regions, then presumably they also support our case when they support that these regions actually get to have protection. They only talk about the likelihood of how this is going to work. For example, how these companies are going to have expensive professional lawyers. Okay, let's bite the bullet, right? But let's characterize why these companies want to get into the land. If they're going to want to use the land, at the very worst case, they need to lose a lot of money. Like they said, how they are going to hire these professional lawyers for millions of dollars in order to get into this place, right? So we think that in order to actually use this place, they need to trade off a huge amount of their profit, which cannot even be gotten by using the land. So we think that the moment we create this huge and tall entry barrier for them before being able to use the land, in contrast to just having the government being lobbying, it's much easier for these regions to be protected under the house. So even if it's not going to be perfect, as in no one is going to be able to enter and they are going to sue each other in court, at least we have people, for example, donating around the world to help the legal personhood of this region, because they also want their safety net and, for example, to still have oxygen in Amazon to actually still live a healthy life. So we think that that is why people also have the incentive to help, and that is why governments will have corporations will have less incentive to come in, because they need to spend a huge amount of money to actually be able to use the land. The case of opposition talks about two things, right? One, the right of their case consists on regulation. So the debate cannot toss on justification. Dazzle cannot get back and change the stance, right? Having said that, the comparison on government is better or this mechanism. So if we can prove that government is not reliable, we directly win the debate. They prefer the government to control. 5 responses. First of all, we say that the government is unreliable. This can be seen where the government has less interest to focus on environmental issues, because this is not a strategic voting campaign. But as the result of environment being better, it's not feasible and long term. But politicians only serve in the office for like a term or two, so they don't really have interest to do so, because the spotlight will be given to the next politician who's getting elected instead, not them. So what politicians do is usually economic policies, human rights policies, because those are the ones that give immediate results and give the most emotion to the people. Number 2, we prove to you that it's not good to have voting issues because it's not feasible and etc. Because this is not feasible. All of the state structural reasons that Jones gave to you, where awareness is not going to exist because there's no popular support to have environmental friendly, as presumably that this comes on a trade-off as well with economic interests of society. That is why the government don't have the interest to actually protect these places in the first place. But number 3, indigenous communities are still alienated and left behind by the majority of government. This means that government does not care because they're not the voter bases. So they will care more for the majorities that actually will harm the environment much more. Sure, they say the government cares about the welfare of people, but it's minor in terms of numbers. Number 4, corporations will be easy to lobby governments. Most governments are lobbied because there's a corporate capture where companies once funded political campaigns like Hillary Clinton in the like Trump in the 2016 election. That is why the government will be likely to be lobbied and biased towards these corporations as well. And it flips the entire opposition case on lawyers, because government also lobbies lawyers, and governments also have the capability to actually change the law, right? So, and number 6, if government and the people have protected the environment, like Bali, for example, the debate has no delta, because then they're also not punished, so they have no impact at all. The case of opposition mainly talks about 2 things, right? 1, on the right of humans to use land, and number 2, on who actually creates net good. We say that this has been fulfilled in the status quo. We have many places with urban developments. People already have land. They own 90% of the land in the world. We think that there's enough land for people in Indonesia to actually use as a business mechanism. So it doesn't matter whether or not the land in Amazon is used. We already have enough land. Number 2, the problem then becomes when people overpollute, they destroy everything they come across simply because it's profitable. Even if it's not corporations who are using the piece of land, having humans live there also brings damage. For example, places in the mountain of Himalaya are badly damaged because they have a high number of tourists, which destroys the place because of pollution. More and more buildings are built, and it lost its life because they are buried under 5 meters of concrete. And those remaining 10% are destroyed because they don't give people deterrents for destroying the region. We think that on our side, this is objectively good because it creates net good. Notice that the characterization of these places are places that are sensitive. For example, a place that actually contributes in giving oxygen for human beings. And that is why the moment that you let people have the capability to actually destroy this place, they're not only destroying the region, but they're also destroying the lives of many people, especially those people who actually live around it. So what's the comparative? I think policy passing is a fine. And plus the one that will regulate this is going to to be a neutral third party that will have the expertise in the environment. They say that our side is bad because MNCs can find lawyers. First of all, this is also non-comparative. The comparative is that you rely on the government on their side. There's no legal punishment at all. Corporations can also get lobbied and companies gain full control. But number two, even if there's lawyers, it's hard to find legal loopholes because the fact that you destroy environment is actually something that's factual. And it's hard to contest because it's a fact. The smokes and gases come from your factory. The waste dumping on rivers is your corporations. No matter what lawyers you hire, if it's already factual, they'll still be punished. Even in the worst case that the lawyer works, know that they will not only violate it once, they will continue to do pollution, so they will continuously getting trials. As a result, they will need to give more fundings because we tell you that we care for profit. If they lose profit, there is strategize for other ways to make their product. So judges, I want you to see the harm of destruction of the place, not as a mere region, as a place, but instead as the lives of millions of people. Because when the place dies, us humans die with them. Presumably, the moment that corporations' best interest is to actually get the most profit that is feasible, under their side of the house, we take away this profit. We make sure that they get punished. They need to go to trials, spend millions of dollars just to enter the Amazon forest. It's much better, and we give a much higher barrier for them to enter. Proud to oppose.
All right, I thank the Deputy of Prime Minister for that speech. To extend ops, I call upon PLO.
Hi, can I just confirm that I'm both audible and visible to everyone?
Yep.
Okay. Is human pronouns, I prefer POIs. Just through unmuting yourself, but please don't badger. Once ready, starting in 3, 2, 1. So obviously team government just didn't listen to that LO speech, right? Because the mechanisms that we give to you on punishment, on regulation, are things to suggest that there's absolutely no exclusivity in their case at all. Our claim was that there will be punishment, but that punishment is based on the government and the preferences of the people that you can actually access under our side of the house. Given that there is no such thing as pure legal personhood, what we claim is that it's likely to be exploited by companies. It wasn't simply the case that they have like lawyers and you cannot avoid environmental responsibility. It was the case that this particular legal loophole allowed companies to have far more room than when we just said the government represents the environment as opposed to the environment representing themselves. 2 questions. Firstly, why legal personhood is principally restrictive. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why this opens room for worse outcomes for the environment, flipping the entirety of their case. Firstly, why does legal personhood like naturally restrictive? I want to deal first with the responses that they gave towards our case, i.e. they gave you 2 things. One, that the government is unreliable. The first response I have to this is to say that the same mechanisms of third-party advisors, of third independent boards or whatever, can still exist under our side. We explained that the environment is necessarily a voting issue because by their characterization that these ESAs deal with the livelihood of the people to a larger extent, that means people are likely to care about ESAs more than just like some random rainforest, which is the reason why this debate is specifically about ESAs that are high impact towards its people and therefore are likely to be big voting issues in that country. So for example, the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. Number 2 is that even in their best case scenario where you have some form of like unreliable government that might be lobbied but can still be checked by the vote anyway, I think it's much worse to have an independent third party that just has veto power over everything, that can like sue on behalf of that environment. I'll talk about why that's not true, but I'll actually flip this and say that it's much worse for 2 reasons. Number 1 is that there's often disproportionate power given towards like this particular party, right? The second thing to point out is that this is not true. Like this is not the preference of the people. The priority in this debate is not necessarily to have environmental protection. It is to have the livelihoods of the people, given that we place a premium on things such as democracy, for example. And for that reason, given that they never prove why the environment has the same stakes as actual human lives, you must prioritize the lives of people, or you must prioritize the preferences of the people that we access towards a government as opposed to towards like a legal personhood that's like very vague. The second response I want to make is towards this idea that governments are likely to be lobbied. There's the same issue here because they don't actually deal with the mechanisms. I still don't understand why this is exclusive, because inhabitants of that land can equally sue the government for any form of negligence, especially if by their own characterization, it's hard to avoid fault when that environmental damage already occurs. For that reason, it's much easier to sue the government in that particular regard and like overturn the lobbying of corporations in comparison to the corporation actually countersuing you, which I'll talk about in my like second clash. There were three things that we give to you as a form of independent arguments that were not rebutted at all. I hope they do this in their third. The first thing we said is that on principle, there is no such thing as real legal personhood. And like as a principle, it stands by itself because it can't, like the environment cannot express preferences as a legal person and therefore cannot be represented. That leads to massive outcomes in which you are unable to actually like defend the particular ESA in court, which I'll talk about later. Two, that legal personhood is naturally restrictive to government policy. We give you both best case and worst case examples, i.e. in the best case example, like it looks like endangered species, which presumably becomes the property of the ESA, are no longer able to be touched by the government, are no longer able to like be nurtured by the government. So if they care about biodiversity, this is naturally a restrictive policy that cannot exist in their world. The worst case scenario is like people like destroying the environment for palm oil industries, which at that point prevents the governments from boosting an economy in an important sector. I think the vast majority of governments face international backlash as well when they like harm environments or harm ESAs to a much larger extent. So think about like Singapore backlashing against Indonesia when they like made palm oil plantations, which suggests to us that even if you destroy one ESA, like the governments are likely to replant and are likely to like recover their tracks as a result, meaning that we at least give them some form of flexibility to like make policies where their policies are due. The third thing that we give to you as an argument is that it takes away ownership from people, especially indigenous people. This works because in some instances, like giving back ownership towards the people acts as a reparation towards them, and therefore the channel is not the government. So their rebuttal about like indigenous peoples are not represented does not make any sense. I think for a lot of people, it's very important for them to modify environments, to have their own cultural practices. Insofar as you have a third party that is not indigenous or is unable to connect with those experiences, I think you take away some form of autonomy from those people. How do you weigh this argument? Number one is that there are many things that can or cannot happen to the environment in this debate. Exploitation might happen or it might not. The need to preserve certain species. Regardless of this, therefore, you must prioritize being able to be flexible for the government to protect the environment on their behalf and not be constrained by legal metrics. Two, environmental protection is not the absolute goal in this debate. They never weigh this. It's too late to do it. The absolute goal is dependent on the state and the preferences of the people. Second idea, why does this open room for legal exploitation? I want to first kick out their idea that this changes the actions of the people. One, none of their 6 mechanisms, if you listen to it carefully, are based on a legal basis and based on the idea that you need to have legal personhood, i.e. all the campaigning still works if people care about the environment that much because it affects them and you humanize it. That can just merely be a rhetoric shift in the way environmental movements message, not a legal thing that has to exist in policy that people are unlikely to look at in court, right? The second thing is that I think under our side, we don't force some form of organic change. I think it starts from societal level acceptance in comparison to their world, where the vast majority of people might be sued, for example, by doing actions out of ignorance, or inhabitants may be sued for practices that they have done for like myriads or like years in the past or decades in the past. This is not just a backlash argument, but it manifests in the way that they are able to counter veto committees or counter this third party that is seen as not representative of their own views that they cannot check against the government. Last thing I want to talk about is on the incentives of corporations. One, lawyers are expensive, but in comparison to changing their entire business model, lawyers are cheap, especially with all the 3 mechanisms we give you, which means that companies will rather sue the state or sue the government or sue the entire land itself in comparison to changing the business model or changing to become environmentally friendly, because it's much cheaper to do so for 3 reasons. Number one is that you can force the environment to enter coercive contracts. 2, that there's a possibility of counter-suing, which is bad because any form of loss that you face from suing will directly disadvantage the environment and give power to the company, i.e. 20 meters of land for that company, right? But thirdly, the environment is always defenseless. That is, there is the legal loophole in court that to be represented, you need to be able to express your preferences towards your representative. Given that the environment cannot do that, I think corporate lawyers make it super easy to kick out or strike out lawyers, even if there's some defense from like lawyers of the state. The argument is questionable because they can never fulfill the burden of proof in court. It makes it far easier for corporations to win court cases. Under our side, I think governments can still own the land and are able to sue on that basis. And they can actually point to that factual basis as opposed to just legal like loopholes that just draws out the court cases. For those reasons, vote for all.
Okay, I think the DLO for that speech, to crystallize government's case, I call upon government whip. Here.
Am I visible and audible?
Yes, you're visible and audible.
Cool. POI verbally and preferred gender pronouns she, her.
Bentar ya, lagi final. Oh, oops.
Okay. The strategy of Dazzle is lazy because instead of responding, he tried to co-opt all benefits by saying that we want to punish MNCs too, but under government. But it is unclear how all their concerns differ because presumably MNCs also can hire lawyers against government. Their concern on environment, the concern on environment not being able to voice out preference also becomes symmetric. Further, they have no fiat that there will be regulations by government. Insofar as we can prove government has no incentive to do so, all their mechanism doesn't work. They cannot co-opt our benefits. I have two questions in this speech. First, can opposition co-opt our benefit? Is there likely to be regulations by government or not? Second, which side brings better accountability? First question then, can opposition co-opt our benefit, and is there likely to be a regulation by government or not? Two observations. Observation number one, they told you that they want government to be the one who care for the environment. Two responses. First, if the government does not care, if the government does care, why does Bolsonaro not protect Amazon? There is no fiat that all governments will be very caring towards the environment. Not all governments will be Democrats. There are many governments who are economic incentive based as well. This also looks like the Middle East country who keep on using their oil resources, for example, so that their economy can improve. They cannot just say that they are going to replant in the environment because nature cannot be flexible. You cannot destroy a region and replant because the way the environment works is once you destroy it, it can take decades, for example, before they can return to the way they used to be. So before you can change things, you will also have to face the damages of environmental damages. So, and it also takes a lot of money to replenish, right? So you lose money, lose time, and lose the environment on their side. Second, they also tell you that this does not compare to MNC's lawyer. We do think that this is going to be symmetrical on both sides. On your side of the house, the companies will be able to bribe the government itself as well. And because they need funding from corporations for their campaign, for example, they can be lobbied as well. On our side, there are still chances that the legal personhood can give better protection for the sensitive areas. This is true because there will be environmentalists, for example, who will hire good lawyers for the sensitive area as well. And also observation number two, they say that this is a big voting issue. Two responses. First, no, that doesn't happen under your side of the house because there's no ESA under their side, which means that when people don't see that our environment is important and are actually sensitive, people have no incentive to vote for environmental rights. This looks like Indonesia, for example. We are full of nature that is important, but no one actually cares, right? Corporations still pollute whenever they like to. So when you don't have ESA, you don't have any political capital for the environment. They cannot co-opt our benefit, and also there's less sense of urgency because people don't see anything that is actually concrete, such as this kind of legal personhood, right? And so second, why would that happen under our side of the house when ESA exists? Notice that the government does not care about the environment. We told you why for two reasons. First, it's long-term issue and it will be discredited to other politicians as well because they also don't want to have that kind of legacy for the next politicians, for example, meaning that they will be very, very short-termist under their side of the house if they want to use the government mechanism as well, right? And also second, but most importantly, we proved 6 reasons why society is not woke on this issue that went unresponded by Dazzle. And also remember that for example, one, harms of climate change on the environment are not obvious and visceral. Two, it's easier for governments to distort narratives. Some individuals don't think that a flood is caused by pollution when government can frame it and shape it as natural disaster being once in a millennium, for example, which is why the government literally did in the worst flood in human history in Jeongjo, and also because there's a collective action problem, and also for not popular issues compared to the economic policies, they are immediate and have direct consequences to where you live, where you are able to buy and what schools you can go to. And also 6, because there's a lack of visibility.
as to how much an individual is polluting in that certain area, right? So it is unclear to the extent which the harm actions will create. For example, if China has many factory, for example, it is unclear as to which extent it is polluting, right? So this is wrong-leaning, because if we show society does not care and isn't really aware, Gov also does not care, because government makes campaign based on what society wants. This is crucial, right? And you should weigh this out as well. They told you that ESA cannot voice out preference. They cannot just defend this because it cannot voice out preference, right? Because people who die also cannot voice out their preference. We don't need them to have to express their preference. We standardize this kind of punishment by actions. That's why we don't need environment to testify in court. That right, Dazzle? And there are standards that help cutting trees are bad and objectively bad actions, and it is already factual. It's already very clear, and it's already learned in kindergarten, for example. They also say that campaigning will work. If it works, then Amazon will already be protected by now. But look at the status quo. Name one environment areas that is protected. You cannot, because people care more about the BLM campaign or the feminist campaign instead of environmental campaign. That's why their alternative to attract people cannot work at the end of the day as well. And also note that they don't engage to all defense corporations can do, like PR and donating, while still having that kind of while still destructing the environment at the end of the day. So the way here is that they say that the legal person is bad because we cannot check and balance it. But I think the characterization of legal personhood shows why it's really easy to check and balance, because you can clearly see the damage. We told you we have people who do care about the environment, right? And also, second question, which side brings better accountability? Two observations. Observation number one, they told you that there will be legal loopholes. We said that this is untrue because we told you that under our self-house, we will be able to hire lawyers as well, because there will be many people. For example, the environmentalists will gather the donation, for example, to hire up lawyer when they feel like they need to sue these people, for example, when they feel like these people have already damaged Amazon so badly, for example. Meaning that under our self-house, even if there will be legal loopholes, we say that it is still challengeable, because people will be able to get that kind of chance in order for them to sue that people. Observation number two, they say that vast majority of people might be sued for doing things years ago. Two responses. This is a contradiction, because you also want punishment and regulation as well on your side of the house. So that kind of thing will not. So that kind of thing is symmetric under both sides of the house. And also they say that lawyers are that cheap. First, it is clearly wrong. Their crime are factual and feasible. So we say that it is actually achievable. And also second, no, even if they are cheap, once consumers know you are violating the ESA's rights, then they will boycott you. So maybe you are free from the law, but not your consumers, which means that they will lose a significant amount of profit as well. Third, this is crucial because they never proved why there will be regulations at all for the corporations, which means they can still pollute the environment under their side of the house, and there's no boycott because there's no ESA under their side. So it's not a trending topic and no one knows about it. This is a harm that they never proved at all. Proud to propose.
All right, I think the government whip for that speech to crystallize Op's case. I call upon the Op whip, please.
I would like to confirm that I am both visible and audible.
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Tati. I do not have any preferred pronouns. And if you wish to propose a POI, please feel free to unmute and interrupt me. Thank you very much. All right. I will be starting my speech in a bit. Please hold. I will be starting in 3, 2, 1. Thank you, government, for presenting such a succinct argument. However, we have a few issues with said argument. Before we get into that, I would like to pose a few clarifications. They said that we contradicted when we said that we still want punishment. No, that can still exist on either side if the government wants it. And before I go further into my speech, I will be addressing my two clashes. The first one being why, on principle, ESAs cannot have legal personhood, and the second one being on why this legal personhood opens more loopholes and more possibilities for exploitation. First, the government said that the protection of a region is inherently null in our case. This is not true because the protection of a region is not exclusive to the government's case. Legal mechanisms are currently in place to stop people from destroying the environment. The notion that legal personhood is needed to defend the environment is redundant. Again, there's a little thing called environmental law in place to stop people from destroying the environment. Even if this is true, the ESA's receiving legal status as a person is counterproductive, something I will touch on later in my speech. 2, the government said that the government is inherently unreliable. This is not true, as governments are incentivized by international agreements and international pressure. They are being held accountable by international agreements such as the Paris Climate Agreement, and this should be incentive enough to protect the environment, right? If this is true, how much more reliable can the areas be themselves? We have told you that legal personhood is inherently redundant and does not make sense. Unlike fiction, no Lorax is there to be able to speak for the trees. Why are minors who have cognition are treated as not their own legal entity? Why should a piece of land have more rights than a child? A child cannot get legal representation, whereas a piece of land can? Something seems unjust here. Legal mechanisms are already in place to protect ESAs. People are already being punished for destroying the environment. That's why the entire segment of environmental law exists. Legal personhood can be naturally restrictive. The ESA will own property rights of all flora and fauna that reside in it. Without legal personhood, an owner can change features to, for example, to conserve a certain species. With this, if a certain species is being endangered in the area, no person will be able to change it, and a species will be lost to time forever. In the status quo, people would be able to change the area to conserve it after entering a written agreement with the owner. Since the area has gained legal personhood, it should be able to consent to things, correct? Well, not really. It's trees. Trees can't speak. Legal personhood restricts the government from being able to take care of its people. Like our leader of the opposition said, they can build palm oil plantations to boost the economy, but with this, they can't do that. Legal personhood, again, prevents natives from taking care and claiming their ancestral land. Again, this has been an issue of contention for the past few years, and the government has failed to address our point in this. Now, the government side fails to consider the preferences of the people. So if the preference is no environmental protection, that should be fine. The government keeps on pulling Brazil as an example, and I find this extremely lazy. Bolsonaro is such an extreme example, and that man is inherently shady. They did not pull positive examples like Canada, who aggressively defends and protects their environment and natural resources. Now I will be moving on to our second clash on why this legal loophole opens more possibilities for exploitation. The government said that companies will not be able to sue land because the government said that companies will not be able to sue land because they gain more from buying the land in the first place. Well, this is not true because land is just not land. Land is a new operative place for people to conduct businesses. You may be looking at the price of a meter square of grass, but companies who are focused on their economies are looking at areas with opportunities for a new place of work and even more new opportunities. Even if this is true, land is very valuable. Land is one of the only assets whose values grows exponentially because of the fact that population would increase. Thus, there's more demand for land. Companies are aware of just how much value land has, whether that be in the current time or in the near future. If the government, and we will now be moving on to rebutting the government's second point, why the government cares so much. Why hasn't anything been done about the Amazon? This is not true because you even know about the Amazon is a product that's being publicized. How can we get consent for it to be publicized when it can't even voice out, when it doesn't even have a voice to do so? Awareness itself is something we have done in order to improve the Amazon, including other ways they have improved. An example is laws on the environment and harvesting resources from there. Even if this is true, the government of other nations have always helped in many ways, and we cannot exclusively look at the environment in the Amazon. Additionally, how can we even discuss new solutions on the Amazon if the Amazon can't even consent to anything? They said, the corporations can still be punished. Not true. The government frames people as mindless puppets of the government with no ability to think for themselves. And again, in our world, corporations can still be punished because of pre-existing environmental laws. And again, the government, I would like to point out that the government has consistently ignored this idea of a pre-existing environmental law. And again, to touch back on my original point, to that we say, to the point the government said that the government can still twist the minds of the people, we say that this is not true because people are not mindless puppets of the state and they can think for themselves. There is internet to research and understand. And again, we would like to touch on another thing the government has said, which is dead people cannot testify. Well, not physically, but there are wills in place dictating the views of the dead. Trees do not have such privilege. Now I will be addressing why our side wins. There is a huge legal loophole where ESAs will never have legal defense, which means that you effectively cannot sue corporations because, at least under our side, there is a possibility of change. Hiring lawyers does not work because exactly this loophole allows you to strike out lawyers and their arguments in court. 2, coercive contracts. Entering coercive contracts are inherently biased towards the side of the corporations, as again, like we have stated numerous times, trees cannot speak for themselves. And so we are proud to oppose. Thank you.
Right, I think the opposition whip for that speech, to summarize Op's case, I call upon the Op reply here. Op reply, check.
Yeah, can I confirm that I'm audible and visible to everyone?
Yeah, you're audible and visible.
Okay. I'll be completely honest. Government was lazy because they did not take the time to understand the legal basis argument that we give to you. Notice that this is exclusively a law-based debate, which means that there's not a generic environmental debate where you can claim benefits of environmental awareness if you do not tie that back to the court process and exactly what happens inside the courtroom. Our form of argument is that any form of protection can exist on either side of the house. It is exclusively based on who gets to sue the companies, who gets to own the land, and who gets to make decisions on that basis. We say that when governments do it, it's much preferable under our side of the house. 2 issues. Firstly, on environmental outcomes. Secondly, I'm going to talk about principle as to why this is restrictive. Firstly, on environmental outcomes, taking their only case out of this debate. Firstly, on this idea on awareness of the people, there's 6 mechanisms. As I explained, were not exclusive. They did not bring it up back. In third, no, there are awareness campaigns. Nobody pays attention to exclusively court cases or humanization of the environment itself, meaning that there's just a rhetoric shift in comparison to actually having a legal basis. Number 2 is that there's no argument to this idea of pushback towards environmental policy, i.e., if in their best case scenario they have a third party, this is seen as not representative. At least under our side of the house, we get an organic change through campaigns, which are likely to be much more longer, maybe in time period, but at least far more sustainable when they actually care towards the needs of the people, as opposed to there's just one third party trying to sue every other person. On this idea on corporations, and even if you don't buy the idea on people, I think corporations are where this impacts a lot more people and are the basis of this debate, right? Note that corporations are equally powerful on either side, i.e., they will sue on either side, maybe because they have lawyers, because they won't change the business model or whatever, right? But what we explain necessarily is that the delta is not just that corporations have lawyers, that is unnuanced. Our nuance is that there is a legal loophole when you give legal personhood, i.e., you are not allowed as the government to send a state lawyer to defend the ESA simply because that person is unable to represent the interests of the environment itself, which is a legal loophole that exists where you have to know the preferences of your defendant to actually be able to represent them in court, which is the reason why hiring more lawyers to get rid of this legal loophole does not work, because they are the ones that are going to be striked out in court. Their testimonies are the ones that's going to be striked out before the trial actually begins, which is the reason why corporations are infinitely more likely to win in their world because of this legal loophole. When corporations do win, at least under our side, it does not give them more power, i.e., when you sue the environment, that form of compensation towards a corporation is the environment itself, i.e. they have more power over like the land of that particular environment or the resources that they have, in comparison on our side, when a corporation sues the government as the entity, they can like pay some money to the corporation, but that doesn't give them access to the ESA itself. Weighing, one, this flips the entirety of their claim. Companies are stronger on their side, but it makes them infinitely much more easier to sue the ESA. Two, comparatively, if it is much more easy to sue based on factual basis, it's another reason why the government has to be the one to sue the corporations and not the ESA suing the corporation itself. Second idea on restrictions and why this is principally unjust. The claim I want to kick out is this idea that governments cannot be trusted. We give you hosts of incentives, like they are equally plausible than the incentives they gave to you, right? Like the votes of the people, international condemnation, suing backed by the inhabitants of that land. But we took the worst case here. Even if governments are not reliable and this is a third party, they don't prove why that third party is better, because at least in their world, there is no intrinsic value of protecting the environment, which means that you cannot bypass the preferences of the people who might need that for economic benefits under our side of the house, which is why our argument was twofold. One, that this is government policy, i.e. there can be good government policies such as protecting endangered plants that cannot exist in their world when you cannot have access towards this ESA as the government. Two, that you take away ownership from the people like indigenous groups, which means that it is infinitely worse for those particular beliefs as well. What is the weighing of this argument? One, there are flexible priorities in this debate. Every country has different priorities, which is the reason why you need to have the utmost flexibility and not prioritize this one form of idea. Two, this is particularly important because there are always many incentives that can lead to a good outcome. We access all of those incentives because we can protect endangered groups, palm oil plantations, whatever, as long as the government has that form of control in comparison to the third party that is likely to be sued by that company itself and sue the ESA for those reasons outweigh.
Right, I think the reply for that speech to summarize government and also to close the grand final as a whole, I call upon the government reply here.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, and 1. Two issues in this speech and why we want both. One, is the environment a big voting issue? And number two, on accountability. On the first issue, is the environment a big voting issue? This is the most important clash because if we can show you that it is not a big voting issue, this means that all of opposition's attempt to co-opt out benefits by regulations under government cannot work. We told you that it is not for very many reasons. One, incentive of politicians. Politicians don't really care because the environment is a long-term issue. Mitigating environmental destruction and climate change takes time. It can take like 10 years before a tree can reach your height. And the problem with it taking a long time is that the government is short-termist. There are politicians who care about electability, and the problem with that is they can only serve in office in maximum 10 years. That means that long-term benefits mostly is not a strategy politicians co-opt in campaigns because of the risk of it being credited to future next politicians and instead of them. Further, I think we nuanced it since Jones that environment campaign mostly comes in expense of economic campaign. And economic campaign is mostly more palatable because it's immediate and visible. Number two, on society. We give you 6 structural reasons why society isn't currently aware. They didn't respond, Dazzle just said campaign words. Why? Environmental campaigns have existed back in early 2000s, but society is still unaware. I think additionally, there are other counter-economic campaigns that is more palatable. Further, I think mostly companies can hide the fact, right, by PR campaign and donation to disguise these bad things that they did. This is important because if we show that society does not care, government then does not care as well. Then their desperate mechanism is international convention like Paris Agreement. Love, US pulled out from Paris Agreement. There's a defense of sovereignty. They never show why international agreement affects all countries involved and why that's legally binding. The weighing here is that we went clearly on this, and that means we win the debate because if they cannot have punishment and regulations to the environment, they need to defend sacrificing the environment for interests of corporations, which they did. Number two, which side creates better accountability? No, the thing opposition needs to know is that not all government will have the incentive to really protect the environment. Many governments are driven by economic incentives. If you don't buy Bolsonaro, for example, Middle East countries are also exploiting oil resources. This shows to you that opposition is very best case by assuming that government is all reliable. There might be legal loopholes, but that happens on both sides of the house. Because presumably, even if the legal loophole is that bad, your counterfactual of government will be far worse because it will make them not being able to have the chance to fight, and government will easily run away. In comparison to our side, it's better because at least they can challenge the loophole as well. At least in comparison, in opposition, they'll not be able to get to deter anyone. On your side, you can just make closed-door agreements because the land is yours. At least on ours, when you want to use the land, you'll be sued and go to court and therefore get condemnation from the people, because those people who protect the environment are people who are passionate, people like environmentalists and Greta Thunberg. That is why we make it harder for others to control and manipulate the region. They keep talking about lawyers and say that this is a law debate, right? Dazzle, even if it is, you don't show why your legal impact is exclusive. One, under your side, the MNCs will also be able to lobby the government, meaning that it is much worse because there will be no transparency as well on their side. Number two, even if they win because of the liars, consumers are still going to boycott the corporations unless they change, which makes them lose profit. They'll change their market strategy when there's factual proof that they actually harm these ESAs. Number three, if this is true, they also can't protect the environment from the pollution of the corporations. So they actually have no benefit at all. Even if in the best case they mitigate the harm, at least our benefit still stands. Indigenous communities are harmed the most under their side. We don't understand the one-liner analysis that government will care for them. Brazil didn't care, US didn't care, and make Hawaii a tourism spot. Indonesia didn't care for Papua either, so without ESAs, there's also no incentive for the government to care for the environment under their side. That's all. I love you so much, but we're winning this debate.
Yeah, I thank the government reply. I hope Dazzle loves you back. Yeah, okay. So that marks the end of the grand final round. Everyone, congratulations for making it this far. And yeah, before that, the committee would like to say something. So I'll give the floor to Nena.
Thank you, Kak. Okay, thank you so much everyone for the debate. Don't forget that we will announce the winners and the best speakers on October 16th on the closing SETARA live stream. Before we close the English debate competition SETARA 2021, we will hear a closing speech from our head of committee, Livia Lianasari.
Okay, thank you, Nina. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Greetings, debaters. EDCS 2021 has finally come to an end. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank and congratulate today's grand finalists and to all 32 teams from 12 provinces who took part at every stage of the competition. I'd also like to say thank you to all adjudicators who contributed time and effort to the process. Thank you so much, Ka Eugenia Leoneta, for being this year's chief adjudicator. We've achieved so much in the time we've been here and gained a lot ourselves too. This event is finished, of course, but it doesn't really stop here, and it'll be soon time to be thinking about organizing the next one. I know I've enjoyed today enormously, and I hope you all have too. If there were any inconveniences during the competition, on behalf of the committee, I would like to say apologize. You may reach out to your respective LOs or our contact person for feedback so that we can do much better for next year. Lastly, do not forget to tune in for the closing of SETARA 2021 on October 16. We will announce the winners and 10 best speakers on our YouTube live stream. That is it from me. Thank you very much, debaters. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back at you, Nina.
Thank you, Olivia. Yes, debaters, don't forget to watch the closing of SETARA 2021 on October 16th. And by this, I close the 2021 English Debate Competition SETARA. Thank you, everyone.